Hi, I'm Anthony Newbold, and welcome to A Closer Look. My guest this week is the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Marvin. Minister, welcome again to the show.
It's a pleasure, Mr. Newbold.
Your men and women, specifically in the Royal Bahamas Police Force, they have had their hands full in the last couple of weeks, couple of months maybe. Crime. Have you determined what is responsible for this spike in crime, I would call it, over the last couple of months?
Oh yes, Mr. Newbold, is something that we continue to say, and you've heard it over and over before. That if we continue to look at this as solely a police problem, then we will continue to be fighting at this level for years to come. And as a government, we have certainly taken the position that this is more than just a police problem. What you're seeing here, and I continue to say this wherever I go, that the problems that we're seeing on our streets, it's a manifestation of our neglect over decades. And it's not going to take a quick fix solution for the problem to go away. We have a lot of work ahead of us. And as the police do what they do, which is the prevention and the enforcement of crime and the apprehension of those responsible for the crimes, other agencies have to play their respective roles. We have to work on improving the educational standards of our young people, as is the Ministry of Education is currently doing. We have to work on wholesome and constructive programs, and that is social services and youth. We have to work on building stronger communities. We have to improve the employment position for our people throughout the country. And we have to work on more investments to ensure that we get more of our young people employed. And so there are a multiplicity of issues that we must continue to work toward addressing if we're gonna see any meaningful correction to the problems that we currently face.
Do you need more boots on the ground, or just society itself needs to do some more things?
Well, it's a combination of things. I think that we're moving in the right direction. We would have done a manpower audit of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Just a few weeks ago, we had a squad that would have graduated on Grand Bahama of 30 officers, and an additional squad in New Providence of some 100 officers who just started working in earnest just this week. But as in saying that, I mean, we need a combination of things, and so we need to improve our strategies within our law enforcement agencies. That's certainly a thing, but it's the entire criminal justice system that we must work towards correcting and moving it in the right direction, as well as our communities. Each and every one of us have a vested responsibility toward working to bringing this country back to where it ought to be.
How much of a difference, and I know you talk about all the other things, how much of a difference does the extra men make to your efforts at effective policing? You talk about the manpower audit. How close are you to your preferred number of men for both the police and the defense forces?
Well, we're getting there. We're getting there, and we have to ensure that as we recruit, we're keeping pace with those persons who are retiring, those persons who may have fallen ill and sick, and those persons who would have passed away, and those persons who no longer see the force as a career.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a balancing act. I know the audit called for an additional 700 plus constables to be recruited. And to date, we're well into the hundreds. But we
Yeah,
need,
that is with
Yeah.
the present number. But
Yeah.
again, you talk about natural attrition.
of course,
People are just going to
of
be
course.
moving out of the
Attrition,
cities.
and so it's keeping your fingers on the pulse, and it's a very fluid and a very dynamic situation, and we have to continue, and we're putting systems in place to ensure that we're able to monitor and to address those issues as they come about.
Talk briefly about your overall strategy for reducing crime.
Well, you know, as I said before, as a government, from a government standpoint, we talked about taking a very holistic approach to this problem. So what do I mean by that? It is more than just putting boots on the ground and hitting it hard in these communities, but it's also about improving the educational standards of our young people. As we looked yesterday, a few days ago, I had an opportunity to speak at the launching of a study that was done by the University of the Bahamas in conjunction with the IDB. We looked at a study within the Bahamas Department of Corrections and those persons who are being incarcerated. And so we have to focus on education. We have to make our young men and women more employable. And so, you know, it starts with that. It continues too with not only the educational component, but providing opportunities for employment.
Yeah.
Because there's one thing, you know, of having the education, but not having the opportunities for employment.
Are there some things that, some specific strategies that have worked more than others that you say, yeah, we need to do that?
Oh yeah, strategies continue to work. One of the things that we're doing is we're identifying those hotspot areas throughout our country, those prolific offenders, because one of the things we're faced with in this country, I continue to say, we have well over 100 persons when we last checked that are currently on bail for just murders, and some on bail for multiple murders. Okay, we probably have more than 200 on remand and serving time for murders. Yeah. So the police are arresting these persons. They're putting them behind bars. But again, I mean, when you start talking about the constitutional rights of persons and they're entitled to bail, and they're back out there, and they're the same people the police have to deal with. But unfortunately, many of these persons reside in the same neighborhoods as the persons who are giving evidence against them. Yeah. And so through time, people are either intimidated or people are even paid not to give evidence. And so you're fighting this constant battle. That's right, you're fighting this constant battle with the criminal element, many of whom will see the opportunity that I can commit this crime, knowing that the possibility of me getting free one day is very great, because I could impact on the witness.
Or getting away with it because of all of those.
Yes, because elements. Absolutely.
Got to take a break, Minister. Hold the thought, and we're going to talk about it. Yeah. Take a break after this. We're talking with the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Marvin Dames, here on A Closer Look. Welcome back. You're watching A Closer Look. I'm Anthony Newbold, speaking with the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Marvin Dames. Minister, we're talking about strategies, things that have worked. One of the things we've heard a lot about over the years is intelligence-led policing. Is that one of those things that helps you to do what you do well?
Absolutely. That's something that is very near and dear to me. And one of the areas that I feel that we can improve on significantly. And so as a government, just recently, as you're aware, we would have been able to pass the National Crime Intelligence Act. And very shortly we will be setting up the National Crime Intelligence Agency. And we will begin work on that, certainly before the end of 2019 and 2020. You should probably see a robust National Crime Intelligence Agency, and that's going to be the nucleus of our crime fight as we drive, because you're not going to achieve very much as a law enforcement agency if you can't drive your work through intelligence, and this is something that has always been important to us in the past, and over the years it has slipped somewhat. And we are, as a government, this is one of those key initiatives or drivers that we're working on to help us to get a better hold, a better grip on crime and criminal activities.
Let's talk about Abaco. As much in the news as anything else. What happened to your forces as a result of Dorian?
Well, the forces were there, as you know, in Grand Bahama. We have about 400 officers that are stationed on Grand Bahama on a daily basis, 365 days of the year.
Grand Bahama.
Grand Bahama. And Abaco, we have close to 50 that are always there on the island, and also have a complement of Defense Force officers in both places. And so prior to the storm, we were able to complement the teams that were already there with additional officers. Mr. Newbold, this is one of those things that, Dorian, and this is the way I like to describe it to people, it is something that we would have never experienced in this country before. Dorian was a storm that caused tremendous devastation, as you are fully aware, in the Abacos and Grand Bahama. And it would have been a challenge for even a developed country. And so during the storm, our officers were very active. There are countless stories of police and Defense Force officers rescuing persons, even in the midst of the storm. You heard the story of Assistant Commissioner Butler and his team in Grand Bahama. Persons were crying out for help over the bridge on the eastern end of Grand Bahama. They took an entire fire engine in the middle of a storm, and they got to the bridge. The fire engine was overwhelmed by water, and it floated away. And so those officers had to scurry for their own lives. And so there are countless stories. I got in Abaco immediately after Dorian, got in by a U.S. a DEA helicopter, and thank God for our neighbors, the United States of America, because with the assets that they have at their disposal, I think that went a long way in assisting us, especially during those initial phases. Because remember, the airports were all, you couldn't land because there was water and debris. The streets were all blocked up. You couldn't pass. And so immediately after the storm, we sent additional troops in both places. We were later complemented, as you know, by CARICOM. We had 100 officers from Trinidad and 121 from Jamaica. And then we had a complement of police officers as well from CARICOM. We had U.S. personnel as well, the Coast Guard, who did tremendous rescues. Right after the storm, winds were still high. We had the DEA, the FBI. We also had the British Navy assisting us, and the Dutch. We were able to do some engineering work to connect Abaco in the area of Crown Haven, where it was separated by the water. So I had to construct a makeshift bridge from quarry. And had it not been for the work of the Defense Force and police officers just in clearing roads and making the airports accessible, we would still be at this point, because we had to land for days in helicopters because we just had no place to go. And so we are working towards a complement now. We're close to about 230 Defense Force officers on the ground in Marsh Harbor alone, and close to 100 police officers on the ground. I was just there about a week ago, did patrols with the officers throughout Marsh Harbor and the Keys, did night patrols, and I'm pleased to say that the officers have that area under control.
Good to hear that, because I wanted to ask you about that, because I've seen and heard reports about looting underground and people being in fear for their lives, and I wanted to ask you, you got enough boots on the ground in Abaco now. What's the situation?
Of course, this is a very fluid situation, Mr. Newbold, as you know. When you have a crisis of this magnitude, unfortunately, there are persons out there who look for the opportunity to take advantage. Let's bring this into perspective. On Abaco and the Keys, almost every resident, almost every business would have been compromised. Yeah. No lights. Given that they're compromised, infrastructure have been totally destroyed. So there's no light. All right. There's very little communication. There was a point where there was no communication, and all vehicles, just about our first responders' vehicles, were destroyed. In Grand Bahama alone, we had 69 police vehicles destroyed.
Yeah.
In Abaco, we had 14. So all of our vehicles were basically destroyed.
Yeah, you've had to replace all of them.
We had to replace all of them. But despite that, the officers use their experience and their ingenuity to create a presence. I mean, to date, immediately after the storm, the police would have arrested some 20 to 25 persons for stealing and possession of stolen articles and stuff of that nature. And so, that is what you'll have. But I can say, as the days move on, the police and the defense force and their regional counterparts, but primarily the police and defense force, took control of that island. As I said, I did some patrols last weekend. I was on the island for 2 days in the night, and came across one vehicle moving at about. The police were able to stop that vehicle, and the individuals in that vehicle gave a plausible excuse as to why they were on the road.
Why they were out and about.
But we saw very little movement in respect to people. That is, these officers continue to do a yeoman's task because, as I said before, the infrastructure, we've just recently, in partnership with Motorola, brought in some technology now that will give the officers the ability to communicate across settlements. Because, as I said, a BDC was down, Alive was down at a particular point. We only had the use of sat phones. Only a few persons had sat phones. There was no light. The roads were impassable. The airports were impassable. So it's law enforcement who initially, because I was on the ground immediately in Abaco, immediately after the storm.
Yeah.
And I was there with the British team and the Defense Force officers distributing water and MREs, meals ready to eat, to the residents. That was a day after that day the all clear had been given. And so I actually saw this with myself, and police were actually on patrol and taking control of the island, and the Commodore and the Commissioner were along with me, and their teams were doing an assessment. And this is a very dynamic situation. I said, even for a developed country, there would have been challenges. Remember, I tell people we're an archipelago, all right? And so there are advantages of being an archipelago. So you can promote it from a tourism standpoint because we got different islands. But when it comes to disaster preparedness and disaster management, there are a tremendous amount of complexities because you don't have one land mass.
Yeah.
So you have multiple disasters. You have a disaster on Abaco Island, a disaster on Grand Bahama Island, but you also have a disaster on Sweden's Key. Those are the keys around Grand Bahama, and all of those keys around Marsh Harbor and Abaco in general. And so you have to manage each of those as a separate disaster. And right now we have presence on every island, every settlement, and every key where there is a presence.
Again, we're going to continue talking about this one, talk a little bit about Grand Bahama, but we got to take a break, and we'll be back with more on A Closer Look after this. Welcome back to A Closer Look. Anthony Newbold speaking with Minister of National Security, the Honorable Marvin Daines, talking about the aftermath of Dorian, the deployment of your men and women, and what they've had to do to keep the peace and keep order. One of the concerns, and we keep hearing it discussed, is verifying the number of people who are deceased.
Right.
Raw terms, the body count. What is your role, your meaning the Minister of the police force and the defense force?
I'll tell you a story, Mr. Newbold. We had an expert team in from the U.S. that would have dealt with disasters around the world. We had a briefing, myself and the Minister of Health and the team from the U.S. They were doing a debriefing after their visit. And one of the first things they said was that they commended the team from the Royal Bahamas Police Force on how professional they executed their work, and they had no concerns about their experience and ability to execute. After having said that, the count to date is 61 bodies, right? 9 in Grand Bahama, and the remaining numbers, I think 52 in Abaco. The police would have reported to date about 30 persons reported missing, and that has been consistent from almost after the storm in Grand Bahama to present. About 30 persons reported missing to date in Grand Bahama. Now that can fluctuate up or down, right? But that has been consistent from a few days after the storm. And the police have been very active on their social media page, putting photos out there and asking the public to report. And to date in Grand Bahama and Abaco, the police reported numbers, and we're working with all of the relevant and the stakeholder agencies, but the police reported missing numbers in Grand Bahama now is at 252.
That's Abaco.
In Abaco.
Okay.
252. Now again, the nature of this is that can move up or that can move down. But we're about over a month out now, so I don't know how much that will move. It will move up, but there is a possibility. In Grand Bahama, 8 of the 9 bodies have already been identified.
Okay.
All right, and they have a fair idea as to who the 9th body is, but we're also doing DNA work to assist us in the identification process. The same is being done for Abaco. And so, this is how these things are handled the world over. And sometimes there is an expectation that given the magnitude of this event, we should be in the thousands. And because I heard a lot of the speculations before, and when the numbers don't meet that, some people will develop a view that the authorities may be hiding something.
Yeah, well, that was my next thing, because people are saying, well, they've got all these bodies that they're hiding from the public.
Yeah, this is very sensitive to all of us because, many persons, even police officers, would have had relatives impacted by this, and many of them would have been impacted by this.
Yeah.
And but this is a very sensitive process, and we always want to be very respectful of those persons who would have had relatives lost or missing. And so sometimes there's urging by the public, we need to. But 2, you have to balance that with this whole question of how do you respect the families moving forward, and how do you ensure that you're not being insensitive
You're going to have curfew in Abaco?
I don't feel right now, Mr. Newbold, based on what we're hearing from the experts on the ground, that there's a need for that. All options remain open because as we continue to move forward and more people begin to move back onto the island, we will continue through our law enforcement agencies, who are the lead agencies on the ground and who are certainly advising us in the ministry and the government. We will keep all options open, but at present, I don't see the need for that based on the briefing that we've been getting, as well as based on my own observations. And I've been there and I did some night patrols with the officers. We're saddened by the fact that persons would take advantage of these situations. And I think a lot of what happened just before the storm and immediately after the storm, when the focus of our first responders was on protecting and saving lives. Persons saw that as an opportunity. For example, there was a gun shop there, and the guns were not, based on what I was told, was not kept in safes. And there were about close to 20 weapons taken out of this gun shop just prior to the storm. I don't think the owner was on the island. But due to intelligence, immediately after the storm, the police swung into action and they were able to recover at least 15 of those weapons. Is there
an ultimate plan that you are going to devise separate and apart from what you already do in Abaco, or it's just you've got a finger on what's happening in Abaco, you don't need to come up with any highfalutin plan? Abaco is going to be policed the way you've policed it.
Well, yeah, we've been briefing. I've been receiving briefings every day. The cabinet has been receiving briefings as needed by our law enforcement heads. And we have a plan articulated for both Abaco and Grand Bahama. As you would have heard just recently, we would have announced a Defense Force Commander King from the Defense Force, who will have oversight for the Defense Force operations for both Grand Bahama and Abaco. We have Assistant Commissioner Ismaila Davis Delancey from the police side, who has been doing her work. I just heard from her this morning, as a matter of fact. And so we have a plan in place, and that plan is very fluid because given the dynamics of the situation that we're facing on both of these islands, and very shortly we're going to have a lot of ramping up, a lot of construction going on, a lot of people returning with no place to stay. Although we would have formed a ministry to focus on this, led by the Honorable Aram Lewis, and so we should be getting some tents in very shortly, so that people can begin returning. We can begin moving back to some phase of normalcy. But as we do that, law enforcement on the back end is also reviewing all of this with a view to ensure that they have what they need on the ground to address any of these changes, all of these changes as they come about. So this is a very fluid situation, Mr. Newbold, and but I assure you and I assure the Bahamian public that we take this very seriously, and we're on top of it, and there will be there will be no one breaking the law and assuming that they can move free.
You have it covered.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For coming again. And thank you for watching A Closer Look. Remember, you can also watch us on Facebook and YouTube, and you can listen to us on radio, 8 o'clock on Monday evenings and 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon.